For joining us today. This YouTube channel is a channel entitled Encountering His Story. The idea behind it is to be a support to a series of presentations that were made at Lakewood Baptist Church, this one being made on the 25th of May, 2020. Our subject is found in the 6th chapter of the book of Ephesians. It deals with the Christian armor. The Apostle Paul, as he wrote that epistle, was in house arrest in Rome, and he was being guarded by a Roman soldier to whom he was chained. As he was finishing up his epistle, starting at verse 20, he draws an analogy between the armor that was being worn by his Roman soldier and the things which God has provided for believers in their struggle in the spiritual warfare. We've had the opportunity to look at a number of these items: the belt of truth, the breastplate of righteousness, and the shoes of peace, or the feet shod with the readiness of the gospel of peace. And that brings us to the next piece, which happens to be the shield of faith. This video is a support video for that presentation that was made on the 25th. We live in a day and an age where Rome is long gone, and many of the things that relate to Rome are not of present knowledge in the lives of people today. And so in order to understand the analogy and the application that Paul is making and that God is making for us today, we have to know a little bit more about some of those items that are no longer in vogue. And so today we're going to do that. We're going to look at the shield of faith, and we're also going to look at its use and also the other weapons that are related to it that help us to understand the application of the shield of faith. Now, as we do this, we're going to take opportunity to cut from here to a room where all of these artifacts exist. And we'll have an opportunity to look at them, understand why they were used and what they were used for. And then, of course, the application is made in the presentation on the 25th. I want to thank you for joining us. I am Dr. Dennis Stevenson, and we are now going to cut away to the items themselves. Here we have an illustration that's going to help us to understand the use of the shield by the Roman soldiers. In this illustration, you see a typical tactical Roman group. The shields in the front are protecting the front of the ranks, and behind them are the men with weapons. In this case, they happen to be pilums, and we'll talk more about those in a little bit. And behind the first four ranks are another rank of soldiers. In this case, these soldiers are carrying virtuum. Virtuum is a different kind of spear. I'll show you examples of those in just a moment. And then behind that are the archers. The purpose of the shield, as you can see here, is more than just a place of protection or an instrument of protection for the individual soldier, but used in consort with all of his other friends and co-soldiers. It provides a wall of defense against missiles, and I want you to bear that in mind as we keep moving on through this presentation. It's airborne missiles that the Apostle Paul talks about there in Ephesians chapter 6, verse 16, where he says, "Take up the shield of faith, wherewith you will be able to quench all the fiery darts of the wicked one." Now, he's talking about airborne missiles, and we're going to be showing you some examples of those. You can see the archers in the background. They are launching arrows. You can see the arrows in the air. You can also see some of the virtuum in the air as they're being launched against the opposition, which of course you can't see in this illustration. But as we go to look at the actual artifacts themselves, we'll understand what the use of these things are and how the shield of faith comes into play. Let's look at those now. Here we are with our Roman soldier with the accoutrements that we've talked about so far, the belt of truth, the breastplate of righteousness, and he has on his feet, of course, Roman sandals that represented a good firm footing, that being the feet shod with the preparation of the gospel of peace. Our item that we're dealing with today, of course, is this Roman shield. The Roman shield was made of 3 layers of steam-bent oak. They were actually bent on a form. The direction of the grain went different directions, so that it was much like we have plywood today. That was covered over with oak tanned leather. And there's a reason for that, because the burning missiles that would be impacted into the shield, once that happens, the heat from the flame actually warms up the tannin in the tanned leather. It emits a gas that puts the flame out. And so these shields were designed to do a specific job. In addition to that, on the back side here, you can see that there are various kinds of ways that the soldier could carry that shield. Could carry it in the vertical position, could carry it in the horizontal position, could put it overhead. All of those kinds of things were possible with this shield. And as we see here in just a few moments, it was necessary for the survival of the soldier that this shield do its job. We'll take now an opportunity to look at some of the other implements that relate to this shield. The thing that the enemies of Rome used to launch the arrows were a bow that looked like this. They had recurved bows for Rome. They had a pull of about 80 or 90 pounds. It took a strong man to use them, and an arrow that it could launch, and the range was about 150 yards or a little bit more. In addition to that, as you see on the tip of this arrow, they would wrap tow, which is a vegetable fiber, around it. They would soak it in oil or in fat. Then they would light it on fire, and this arrow would then, as you saw the archers in the previous illustration, they could shoot those up, and they shot them by the hundreds, and they came raining down on the troops on the other side of the battlefield. And so the bow became a very important weapon that the shield was meant to defend against, and the arrow, especially burning ones, were used for that as well. But technology doesn't stand still, as you might well imagine. And so the bow, which had been in existence for a long time, was supplanted later on in Roman warfare with another item. And that item was the crossbow. The crossbow was a great improvement over the bow, primarily because the bow was much stronger, 80 to 85 pounds of thrust on the bow itself, but on this crossbow, 750 pounds of thrust. They also fired a weapon like this. It's called a crossbow bolt. It also could be tipped with tow and lighted on fire and used against the opposing soldier. So the Roman soldier's shield, as you saw in the illustration, was particularly effective against these weapons that were fired. They're aerial weapons that came in and impacted that shield. If they didn't impact the shield, they impacted the soldier. And so that shield became extremely important. And as we draw the analogy in the presentation on the 25th, the shield of faith for the believer is extremely important. So with that, I'm going to shift to one more item that launched an aerial weapon. In this case, it's a scorpion. This item is a scorpion. It's a catapult that launches spears. It's a weapon that was developed by the Romans to supersede both the bow and the crossbow. The bow had a ability to launch arrows with 85 pounds of thrust. The crossbow got up to 750 pounds of thrust But this contraption, up to 1,500 pounds of thrust, and it fired a much larger arrow. It was simply a ratchet and a winch that pulled the bow back. It was made with horsehair that was twisted, very elastic, and they could get an enormous amount of thrust from that. A triggering mechanism here that would release it whenever the soldier wanted it. There was a 4-man group that was assigned to each one of these scorpions. There's a ratchet device over here that as you ratchet it back, you can determine how far you want the arrow to go. The one thing about the scorpion is that it launched a very large spear, or arrow if you want to call it that. And with the amount of force that was involved, they proved to be very deadly. Again, another reason why the shield was so critical if you were a Roman soldier on the battlefield. As you might imagine, with over 12 to 1,500 pounds of thrust, cocking one of these scorpions would be a difficult thing to do. And so they were equipped with a ratcheting system as well as a power wheel. I can cock this by simply rotating this wheel and pulling back on the bow, and you can see the ratchet, and I can stop the ratchet at any point that I want depending on how far the arrow is to be shot. Enormous amount of power developed by technology. The other weapons that we need to deal with today are the aerially launched spears and other weapons that the Roman soldiers had. We saw them in the video a little earlier, and they were depicted there. The first of them is this particular spear. It's called a virtuous. It has a small head, a long, thin, soft iron neck, and of course a wooden handle. This particular weapon was launched by hand and was designed to stick into that shield and remain there. Beyond that, the soldier noticed after that happened that the only thing that he could not do is he could no longer move forward because this soft metal neck bent and the point of the virtuous would dig into the ground, and as he started to step forward, he was prevented in moving forward. It was a tactical weapon, never intended to kill, but intended to stop the soldier in his tracks. Later on, they developed another virtuous. It's a little bit heavier than the other one, and they found that this worked just as well as the lighter one did, but it gave more impact and more thrust. And so this virtuous, much heavier one, was used as the lighter ones were used as well. And the idea behind it, and it's important to understand, is that they were designed to stop the soldier in his tracks. And that brings us to the last two weapons that we want to deal with today. And these are called pilum. Some people say pilum, but it's a spear. The spear is also depicted in the graphic that we had, but it has a different purpose. First of all, it's much heavier than the other spears. It has a different shape on the head. The head on the pilum is four-sided, and it's made with a shoulder, as you can see here, a shoulder so that when it penetrated through the shield, forcing the wood fibers back, when anyone tried to extract it, they would pull it back and those fibers would fold behind this head, and you were unable to take this spear out of the shield. This was developed as a means to cause the soldier's arm to become fatigued so that he would lower the shield and thus expose his face and throat, the only part of him that wasn't covered with armor, to expose his face and throat to the arrows that the archers were shooting. The pilum was developed even more later on to what is called a heavy pilum. This heavy pilum has a lead weight that is attached to it. Same style of head with the shoulder that can't be pulled back through the shield, but a much heavier weapon. This was designed again to lower the shield, cause the soldier's arm to become fatigued. And as that shield dropped down, he became vulnerable to the arrows. Thus it is that the Apostle Paul, at the 16th verse of Ephesians chapter 6, says, with which you will be able to extinguish the flaming missiles of the evil one. The shield was necessary to preserve the life and well-being of the soldier. Hopefully these things that we've dealt with in this video will help you to understand the presentation on the 25th, in which we draw the analogy and the application from what these were designed to do and what the Apostle Paul knew as he wrote would be their function. Thank you for joining us today.